Today coming clean about some of its aid efforts at the height of the financial meltdown. Federal Reserve Chief Ben Bernanke made $3.3 trillion in assistance available, and according to today's release, large amounts of it went to institutions including Goldman Sachs, Bank of America, Wells Fargo, even U.S. units of foreign banks such as Switzerland's UBS and France's Societe Generale. In the case of Goldman Sachs, the bank went on to post record profits last year after receiving government aid. Now, my next guest has been an outspoken critic of the Federal Reserve's actions and before, during, and after the crisis. I want to welcome Texas Congressman Ron Paul. Congressman Paul, welcome to Bloomberg.
Thank you. Thank you. Nice to be with you.
So, looking at the release of information from the Federal Reserve, what do you make of the U.S. subsidiaries of foreign banks receiving some of that U.S. aid?
What are the people who lost their homes and their mortgages that didn't get bailed out? How do you think they're going to feel? And people who have been losing their jobs? No, I think it's criminal. And Goldman Sachs and the rest of them, you know, we buy up all those derivatives. I'm a little bit surprised. I didn't estimate that the Fed had already passed out $3.3 trillion. They just created that out of thin air, and now the taxpayers, through the Fed, they own all those worthless derivatives. So we have a long way to go before we correct this and liquidate all this bad debt. But for the time being, some big people are going to benefit. You know, the banks are going to make a lot of money and things are going to look grand, but there's still going to be a lot of people unemployed, and there's a lot more people yet to lose their houses. It's a very, very unfair system. And of course, the ramifications of this is you can't bail out the kind of a problem we have today with just printing money. And the amount of money they're creating, you know, it was 1.7. Now there's another $600 billion, and they hardly think anything about it. So I don't think our problems can be solved in this manner.
Well, Congressman Paul, what would you have had the Federal Reserve do at that time? I mean, can they be given some credit for having shored up the financial system at a time of crisis?
Sure. I think they prevented a bad recession for the people who deserved it, the big money people who made all the billions when they were blowing up the bubbles. But they didn't prevent the tragedy for the people who were on the other end, the mortgage holders and the houses and the unemployed. So, yes, they prevented a deep, deep depression recession for the Goldman Sachs of the world. But, no, they should have allowed the correction to occur. I mean, there were worthwhile pieces of General Motors. But for us to go into debt is the thing that's staring this Congress in the face. They don't know what to do about the debt. The national debt last year went up $1.6 trillion, and they don't know what to do about it. They don't even know how to raise the debt limit next year. They're going to have trouble doing that. So this is hardly very fair to the system. But yes, on the short run, the financial markets feel better about it, but they didn't deserve being bailed out. They deserve to go bankrupt and let the good parts be bought up. I mean, there were good parts of General Motors. Somebody should have bought that up. But it's just not part of the way the market ought to work and how a free society ought to operate. This is all for special interests.
Congressman Paul, you've heard some of the recommendations from the Deficit Reduction Commission. Do you support any of their proposals?
Well, very generally, I'm not very optimistic about it. Congressman Frank and I sent a letter to the commission and asked them to consider cutting back a little bit on military, and they said yes, they would consider a couple $100 billion on that, but we're spending trillions, so I like that part. But you know, they said that we have to do something about it. This is critical, but they suggested that we not do anything next year because they don't want to do anything during a recession and a weak economy. What they're saying is their policies would weaken the economy. I claim that a free market approach would inspire the economy, get taxes down, get regulations down, and the many things that we should be doing. But I don't think proposing cuts of $200 billion in 2014 is going to do very much because it's not a budgetary problem per se. It's a philosophy of government problem. As long as we think we're going to be the policeman of the world and spend endlessly running around the world, being involved in every event conceivable, and running a welfare state and sustaining a social security and a welfare system and Medicare system that's, you know, bankrupt, You can't change it by tinkering around the edges and saying, well, in 2 years or so, we're going to start cutting $100 billion here and $100 billion here, when we're talking about trillions of dollars of debt. Here we just have this example of the Fed off budget, no permission of the Congress, are able to inject $3.3 trillion. I mean, it's totally out of control. This was never meant to be this way.
We've got more with Congressman Ron Paul, more on the Federal Reserve. That's next on Taking Stock. This is Taking Stock on Bloomberg. I'm Pim Fox. We're speaking about the latest Federal Reserve revelations of who they aided during the financial crisis. Our guest is Texas Congressman and former Republican presidential candidate Ron Paul. Congressman Paul, a new Congress will be sworn in January. Majority of Republicans in the House. Are you going to be the new chairman of the House Financial Services Committee?
Well, I'm certainly in line for it. I've waited almost like 25 years, so I think my seniority qualifies for me, and I've been the ranking member, and I'm making the assumption that I will be the chairman of that committee, yes.
And will you get the support of your Republican colleagues? Because in the past, many Republicans were opposed to your taking over the chairmanship of the committee.
Yes, that is true, but there have been changes, and there's a change in the economy as well, and a perception outside of Washington. And I'm getting more support. I mean, the example that I best can cite is the fact that all Republicans supported audit the Fed bill, in the last Congress. So that's pretty good. And there's a lot more criticism of the Fed. It's not just me by myself doing it. Even some bankers do it, and even worldwide central bankers do it. So, the sentiment is much different, and other people who are, I consider, more mainstream politicians are starting to criticize the Fed as well. So I think the climate has changed, and I think that will give me the opportunity to serve as the chairman. You
previously called for an audit of U.S. gold stockpiles in Fort Knox. What do you want to know?
I want to know if the gold is there. Over the last 10 years or so, central banks have been systematically selling their gold. They've been loaning the gold, and there have been swap arrangements made. And that is one of the things that we'd have a full audit of the Fed, since the gold, is listed as an asset of the Fed. We should know, is the gold really there? Have they made any arrangements? See, the physical presence of the gold is one thing, but what about the agreements? And that's one thing that the Fed really, really guards, is any agreements with other central banks and other governments and international financial organizations and all the quid pro quo that goes on. So, yes, I would like to know if the gold's there and who really owns it.
Congressman, are you still advocating the disassembly of the Federal Reserve System?
Yes, and I don't think the Federal Reserve System has served us well, and I don't believe it was ever mandated or authorized or permitted by the Constitution. And they give us our business cycle, they give us our booms and our busts, our inflations and deflations, and all the problems that we have. So